Bigjobs.
Good job. Start as you mean to go on. Awesome. Yes, big jobs indeed. Welcome to I've Never Read Discworld with your hosts, PJ Hart and Andy Luke. This is the voice of PJ Hart. The slightly Celtic sounding voice you first heard was, of course, Andy Luke. And this month we are talking about what book, Andy?
Carpe Jugulum, which I rate 10 out of 10, my friend.
Well, there you go. Don't stick around to hear the judgment.
Okay.
If you're in
Oh,
if you're in a hurry, you can log off now. You've heard the judgment. Um, yeah, great to hear a bit of enthusiasm straight out the gate. This was a favorite of mine as a teen, for sure, and we'll maybe get into what my reread impressions have been like. But first, maybe Andy will give us the pertinent details, or maybe not for video viewers. You may have noticed that Andy has taken his podcasting setup to the sofa, quite far away from the screen. So I don't know if you can read the show notes from there, Andy. Can you?
yeah. So I've got, what is this podcast? Who be we? I be the guy who is doing his first read through most of the Discworld stuff. And PJ has read most of them before. The odd wee surprise.
That's what you get for letting me do the intro. I didn't set up the format. I forgot.
You can find this podcast at YouTube with the video element or Spotify with the video element, but all through your podcast sphere of audio stuffings.
It's lower resolution on Spotify, so we look a bit younger and prettier on Spotify, I think.
I've got a brand new microphone, so you might have just heard an airplane. So expect high expense, sophisticated technology. Expect a few uninvited special guests. Today we're looking at Carpe Jugulum, which is book number 23, published. Mine says Doubleday, May 1998, but I'm not sure I updated it. My version's Corgi, and it's 1998 Doubleday edition. So yeah.
There you go. Always good to second source these things in the misinformation age. Hold up your copy of the book there for the video viewers.
There we go.
Yeah, so that's the copy that I originally read that I was pretty certain I still had. Um, if anybody's playing along with the I've never read this world drinking game, the fact that I always think I have a hard copy of the books and then I never do. So take a drink now. You can take that one off the list.
And this
So
is the Josh Kirby edition. And
indeed.
at some point, I'd really like us to do like a review of all the covers that come up. Um, you'll see those when we do the chapter synopsis. PJ always forgets when he asks for something to be shown on screen that we're on speaker mode.
Oh,
Um,
totally. Yeah. Yes, that's something we should definitely circle back to. So yeah, May 1998. I have a feeling I might have bought the soft cover of this as soon as it came out. I think I'd certainly caught up, or I'd read. I've been reading Discworld for a couple of years, probably by this point. So if not mid 98, certainly before the year 2000, I would say. I picked this up. I wish I'd been keeping track actually, because it's only when we kind of like talk about each individual book. I didn't read them in order. I would like to go back and maybe try and piece together the order in which I did read Discworld, because I think this was probably one of the first witches books, if not the first witches book that I actually read,
wow.
which probably wasn't ideal from like a witches kind of lore perspective, because there's kind of a lot going on with the relationships and stuff, which we'll get into. But for me, as this kind of, like baby goth, 13-year-old, it was perfect. Like all the sending up of the vampires and everything was just probably exactly what I needed at that time. So before we get too far into that, I guess let's maybe hear Andy's first impressions. Was it a
Yeah,
first
I
time
I mean,
read?
just you mentioned reading order, and the first important thing to me in terms of reading order is that we read book 22B, The Sea and Little Fishes, first, which is a short story which very much acts like a prologue to this. It talks about Granny's solitude and the cave that we find Granny in, and how she is perceived by the people of Lancre. All like a key, massive key theme and a key location and key psychology.
Yeah,
So
good point.
there's
Yeah, and I would,
actually another, what, 50 or 60 pages on top of this sort of weighty volume. And it's,
yeah, for sure, for sure. And my first time reading it in that context. So this is kind of my first time reading this book in its full context, having read every single witches book, including The Sea and the Little Fishes, in the right order, in the run up to this. That was nowhere near the context that I had. I don't know how much, if any, context I had for this book in terms of the witches in their world the first time I read it. So it was a massively, massively different experience for me this time around.
I always look forward, and I suppose most readers do look forward to The Witches. For me, this is the one that, I mean, I've always had a fond spot for The Witches and Granny Weatherwax in particular. This is the one that cemented Granny Weatherwax as a top tier fictional character. I've got a very short list. Linda Day from Press Gang, as portrayed by Julius Wahala, and Granny Weatherwax. That is my top two. Uh,
Wow.
just just stole my heart. I read a very weird comment on Reddit a while ago. Somebody said, "Do you think Terry was in love with Granny Weatherwax?" And I think now I know where that comment came from. Certainly, there's
It's a
so
bit,
much going on
yeah,
in this book. So much. Every
yeah.
page is brilliant.
I think that's really interesting, and it's a difficult question to answer at this point of the series without massive spoilers, obviously. But I would, my theory is that Granny is probably the closest character to the internal Terry, to like the Terry Pratchett that is kind of internal to his mind. Like, not necessarily the Terry Pratchett that he lets other people see, but the Terry Pratchett that he is when he's alone. Uh, I think that's Granny. Like the Terry, like the kind of when he's wrestling with his own demons, or when he's frustrated with the world, or he's let down by humanity. I think he channels all that kind of stuff into Granny. And as I say, without spoilers, I think that manifests in various different ways. I think it manifests quite strongly in this book for sure.
Yeah, and we've seen Granny in this. Well, I mean, Sullen is kind of a default for Granny, but we've seen her in this sort of introspective state of doom before. But it just seems like next level. They're done so much differently here that never feels like tired, or never feels like an echo or a repeat of any kind.
Yes, I think that's definitely fair. And yeah, the kind of the dramatic tension of this book is kind of hung on that entirely. It's with whether the big dramatic question is whether Granny is going to kind of save, is going to come back and save the day, or whether she's going to succumb to that kind of darkness or that kind of malaise. Um, yeah, I think like especially after reading Rob's biography of Terry, like there's moments where you can see where like yeah, this is why Granny exists, is kind of like self-therapy in a lot of ways, I think, for Terry, or at least that's my kind of reading of it. And certainly by the end of the series, by the Discworld series, which we won't talk in detail about here, but I think that impression kind of bore out for me.
Let's we usually start off with doing a back cover synopsis to refresh people's memories, I guess. So we'll do a bit of that, and then we'll continue with our first impressions, I think. Mighty Oates has not picked a good time to be a priest. He thought he'd come to Lancre for a simple ceremony. Now he's caught up in a war between vampires and witches. There's young Agnes, who is really in two minds about everything. Magrat, who is trying to combine witchcraft and nappies. Nanny Og, and Granny Weatherwax, who is big trouble. And the vampires are intelligent. They've got style and fancy waistcoats. They're out of the casket. And sorry, a bit dark over here.
Yeah.
Learn the casket and want a bite of the future. Mighty Oates knows he has a prayer, but he wishes he had an axe.
Very good. Interesting to frame it from Oates's kind of point of view, because it's not like the only very sparingly written from Oates's point of view, you know. But I guess if like me, you're coming to this book as a standalone kind of volume because you're kind of you like vampires or whatever, it's a good he's a good entry point as a character into that world if you're not already familiar with it, I guess.
I avoided annotations for this, or not by choice really, but I'd heard it, read it said that Terry wasn't really a fan of the whole vampire mythos fiction generally.
Yeah, I mean, there's a parody kind of going on here in the way that he's parodied other genres before, but it does feel like there's a bit more straight criticism at the same time, where it's just like, yeah, the tropes of the vampire genre, I guess, are dumb. That's kind of a point that he's making that he never like undercuts or redeems. Just like, yeah, vampires are stupid. The end. and and I'm like, yep. That when you spell it out with the kind of care and skill that he spells it out, it's hard to disagree with. Uh,
Not one that's particularly interested me outside of the whole Buffyverse kind of
uh,
thing. And in that, I
okay.
appreciated some of the touches. I mean, Buffy has in its fifth season, Dracula comes in, and he's
Yes.
like the Elvis of vampires. You know, everybody thinks he's hot stuff. And Spike acts as quite a counterpoint to this, and you can't understand why all the girls are, falling over themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
And so
Yeah.
Terry's doing some really interesting stuff with that type of argument.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let me tell you about my first impressions then. I suppose back in the day, let's say, if not the summer of 1998, definitely the summer of 1999. I remember reading this down at my caravan site. So chances are it would have been summertime. So yeah, as I say, if not 98, definitely 99 at the latest. And like I was super into all the vampire stuff at the time. Like I was reading Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire, like as I say, baby goth, like totally bought into all that stuff. So on the one hand, like Terry's like coming at me personally in this book. Like he's taking the piss out of me personally, as far as I'm concerned, as like a 13 or 14-year-old kid. But the arguments against like organized religion with Oates, like that, I ate that up immediately, like if anybody knows anything about the north of Ireland, like we're a deeply religious society. I come from quite a religious family, and around that time is when I was kind of trying to like be my baby goth and make my atheist arguments to my family and stuff like that. So this book was just like filled with so many good points that I could like lift off the page and turn around and throw at my religious family and get a little bit of an argument going. So yeah, so even though I could tell Terry was kind of taking the piss out of me as an Anne Rice fan, like he was also kind of giving me a bit of a bit of ammo as like a young kind of atheist, I suppose, finding my way in that world. And I still like and even though I knew like he was taking the piss out of the vampire stuff, I was so into the vampire stuff that it meant like I got all the references though, probably for the very, very first time. I think I got like all the references in a Discworld book. So that was cool. Like even the like the I never drink wine stuff from Dracula and like yeah, all that stuff. I love it. Yeah, I appreciate it. I was about to say I loved it. I don't know if I loved it. I probably took it a little bit personally at the time, but at least I felt kind of clever for being able to understand it.
Um, I do have a list somewhere of all the things I really that kind of stuck out. I mean, there were so many wonderful things in terms of how Agnes slash Perdita fits into the threesome, and how Magrat's reinvented with her new kind of, with the child, with Michael Oates, who starts off. as a fairly pathetic character and has a really fascinating character journey.
Yeah,
Um,
he's got a great arc. Yeah, up to the point where like he gets this really meaty kind of point of view scene at the end, which we'll get to obviously. But yeah,
and
considering he's almost wheeled in as like a kind of comedic foil, or like a comedy relief kind of character, like he goes on quite a journey.
so I've got down here my big takeaways, dualities. Agnes, Perdita, Granny, in and out. Um, Vlad and the Master, vampires and phoenixes, and then the whole sort of there's a whole issue. We've mentioned the two big ones, religion and whatever the other big one was, but the third one is there's a whole commentary on ageism going on here. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of Granny Weatherwax, and that bleeds over into the fourth, which is how we perceive others and how we perceive others through others, which is
Mm.
there's a lot of interesting things being said in those two areas.
Is there a midlife crisis thing going on here? Is that what you're saying?
No, I hadn't thought that initially. I guess ageism is just I attended a couple of lectures on ageism recently, and
Oh, okay.
it threw it into my mind for quite a lot of consideration. And if you'd like to check out my press gang video on going back to Jasper Street, I talk more about that there. But it's really interesting. I mean, Granny is kind of left alone, and that is kind of how the people of Lancre, the witches aside, think Granny should be left. But Mike Leoch, for all his faults, comes in and he's like thinking of her pretty much right from the outset. He's got a very compassionate view until he meets Granny, of course.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, we'll
Um,
get there.
Indeed. So, on that note, will we jump into the first mini synopsis? Do you want me to take it, or
Yeah,
would you
if you
like
can
to?
take it, please.
Certainly. So, part one, and also just as always to shout out that Andy is the writer of these, and I think at this stage always will be. They're extremely well crafted. So I'm merely the vessel for his words here. Part one, Naked at Midnight. Knack MacFeagle! A family of vampires arrive in Lancre for the naming of Magrad's daughter. Vlad charms Agnes and Perdita, and Nanny Og networks with his coachman. Her thoughts are chiefly on Omnian Priest, Mightily Oates, his burning of things, and note spelling. Granny attends to witching responsibilities of a somber type, which follow her home.
And just noticing I've put that in the show notes as naked at midnight. It should be named at midnight. No
Yeah, I was wondering.
spelling.
I note spelling. That's yeah. I mean, I went for it there. I was like, I don't remember that, but if it's in the header, I'll read it. It's a very kind of Ron Burgundy kind of moment there. We're definitely not editing that out. It's too good.
Um,
So,
I've
Mac,
got
Mac,
quite detailed notes on the first. I did the whole diary thing, and then I gave up. But right from the outset, it
respect
struck
your
me what a
honesty.
great place Lancre. Lancre's been built up as just this ideal setting for a horror story. The dark trees everywhere, the rough countryside, uh, which is the whole Lancre's perfect for horror. It really is.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is the first time that we're canonically told that Lancre has a border with Uberwald, and like we sort of vaguely know that Uberwald exists because that's where werewolves come from, and that's where all the Uberwaldian expats drink in that bar with Angua and like Morpork and stuff. But I think this is the first time we're told that it has a border, I guess, with Lancre, and that's the part of the world that we're in. And like you say, it's witches. Obviously, we know there's witches in Lancre. We know there's vampires and werewolves in Uberwald, so it makes sense that they're all kind of in the same geographical region, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mentioned whole Vlad's whole charm thing and the idea that he's been like encouraging his kids to drink holy water and garlic and stuff is a really nice spin on an old sort of trope.
Yeah, I mean, it's very Pratchett, isn't it? It's just like Terry. you know, in the face of these tropes, as you say, he kind of sits down and goes, okay, well let's deconstruct that. If vampires are scared of garlic in the same way that I'm scared of, let's say, snakes, if I go to the zoo and I look at the snakes and I get a little bit closer every time, I can get over my phobia of snakes. That's something that I can do as a human being. Take that and apply it to, you know, these monomyths, almost like, you know, these massive kind of folkloric kind of themes, you know, vampires starting with garlic, working all the way up to the big ones like daylight, like they're trying to train themselves to stand out in the sun. I just think it's hilarious. I appreciate it more this time around, I think,
I've got
than
a
the
friend who's
first
got a
time.
fear of spiders, and he leaves a little plastic spider in his kitchen. Just
Right?
to look at it when he comes in and try and build up his resistance to that.
Yeah. My youngest daughter is going through a bit of a bug thing at the minute. It's just part of the developmental stages, I think. I remember my oldest going through the same. I were doing something similar. We're trying to get her to like acknowledge the bugs and like say hello to them and stuff when she sees them instead of just kind of recoiling, you know.
One thing
Maybe she's a vampire and we're giving her, you know, giving her resistance.
one thing I noticed, I was quite pleased. Um, I actually find writing up the synopsis a bit daunting at times because
Mm.
um, well,
That's why I don't do it. That's why I don't do it.
it does only take me a short time, but it can feel quite laborious. Um, and I like them to be as short as possible, which I don't know if that's right,
No, I
but
think it is,
notice
you know.
this one, it is right from this one all the way through. It's been very easy to do because it's almost like on paper in terms of synopsis, it can be made to look as if very little happens at all, which I think is, it's got that wonderful simplicity to it.
Mhm.
It's all real character work rather than plot.
Yes, that's true. And I'm gonna drop a bomb right now. As a result of that, I think it's not as engaging a reread as some of the other Discworld books. Because like if you already know what happens, which I do, then as you say, it's a bit slower. It's a bit more ominous as well. It's a bit darker in tone in places. And like I know obviously what happens at the end, but like those bits where like Nanny's gone and like there's large sections of this book where like hope is kind of lost for the other characters as a result. You know, from a tonal point of view, it can get a little bit heavy and it's not being driven by like a great deal of other action. So yeah, I remember sort of as I was rereading it going, oh man, I know Granny's coming back, and in my head she comes back at like the midpoint, but she doesn't. She comes back at the start of the third act. So there's like a whole act there where I'm just kind of waiting and just kind of willing the plot to move forward. But I definitely didn't feel that the first time I read it, and it doesn't sound like you felt that at all this time. So I think like I wonder is it a conscious step back as well, you know, especially from the likes of the Guards books, which are, you know, very heavily plotted, very tightly plotted kind of procedurals. You know, this is much more of a character piece, especially about Granny and about the changing roles of the other witches, as you mentioned before. So yeah, I think you're right. It's much more introspective. It's much more character driven. But for me, that made it maybe a little bit less engaging on the reread.
There's a couple of solid horror moments in this book, and one of them is in this first part, and it's Granny Weatherwax attending to what seems to me to be a miscarriage.
Yeah, man.
It's never overtly spoken of as such, but that's kind of what it points to, and yeah, it's pretty grim.
It's heavy going. Yeah, and I think that, you know, it sets quite a somber, quite a heavy tone quite early on, which is all to the good of the story because it makes you think that like serious consequences could occur. You know, it sets the tone with the death of a child, which is pretty heavy going by anybody's measure. So that raises the natural question, well, if a child can die in the first 20 pages or 50 pages of this book, then what can happen? What else can happen, you know? but yeah, I find that quite hard. I find that quite hard to read. I find it much harder to read this time around for sure. Obviously, the difference between being a 13 or 14-year-old kid who doesn't know shit about fuck to being, I'm nearly 39. I've got two kids. Reading about kids dying is upsetting, to say the least, in a way that it maybe wasn't before. So, yeah, I definitely like a lot of that stuff, like the darkness of this book, like the kind of that tone probably went over my head a little bit the first time around, whereas now I really feel it. I really feel that stuff. Like this has a big effect on Granny, and as a result, it should have a big effect on the reader, and it had a big effect on me this time around in a way that it probably didn't the first time.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, as just as an adult, even just you're like, oh yeah, like I know things about the world that I didn't know when I was 13 or 14. Like things like this do really happen to people, and it's awful. You just don't have that life experience, when you're 13 or whatever. You just want to read about the vampires. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Not
but
that
here,
darkness really, it does propel the story, propels the character of Granny Weatherwax specifically in that direction of counting her not blessings, the solitude and the pain and the feeling that she's not appreciated. And I think there is a disconnect between her feeling those things and that leading to her um whatchamacall going off to live in the cave.
mm,
But it's very much still, yeah, it's still a thing.
yeah, it's like having to deal with stuff like that, the miscarriage and all that, and oh God, it's so subtly well written as well. It really makes me wonder about like where Terry draws this stuff on. The hints at like what the dynamic in that family is and like why it's so important for Granny to have been there because of how the father would have reacted to the mother after the baby died if Granny hadn't been there. Like all like some really, really significant hints at like the darkness of human nature just in that little kind of introductory subplot. And yeah, it's stuff that went way, way over my head first time I read it. And and now I can't stop thinking about it, you know. Um, and I'm reading this other trilogy at the minute, the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, and she touches on a lot of similar themes actually in that trilogy. So it just felt that like I've been reading a lot of stuff about like kids dying and like parents letting their kids down or like spouses letting each other down in like what are supposed to be fantasy books. It's kind of a lot. Like, I need a break. And on that note, speaking of comedy relief, which I think we desperately need, what about the Knack McFeagle? What's your first impressions of them?
Yeah, we don't get an awful lot in this first section, but I may as well come out and say that, yeah, I quite enjoyed the incomprehensible chaos of the wee free men. Um, yeah, I couldn't understand what they were saying most of the time. But yeah,
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that usually drives me up the wall. Where like if yeah, if something in a book, if an accent is written or a dialect is kind of written phonetically in a book, like I'm always desperate to try to figure it out. But I think I'd read on Elspace before, maybe even as far back as the first time around, that like certainly in this book at least, like a lot of what the Knack McFeagle say is like consciously incomprehensible. Like like he's gone out of his way to make sure that a great deal of what they say literally makes no sense, even if you are like a scholar of Robert Burns or whatever. Like you're never gonna, even if you're like a Scots native, you're never gonna figure this out. He's just making stuff up because it sounds funny and throwing it on the page. And I love that about it. Yeah, it's about the energy, it's about the feeling. It's not about like trying to figure out the actual words.
there must be some L-space annotations or translator tools somewhere. No?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know. It's been a while. It's been a while since I looked it up, but I remember. yeah, I definitely remember at the time. I think he kind of said that, like, as I say, certainly in this appearance, like they're sort of designed to be incomprehensible, which uh, I accept. You know, because yeah, that's usually the sort of thing that I like to dissect as thoroughly as possible. Um, but there's just something about it, and it's always funny. And I think that, like, I mean, I guess it's a trend that's kind of come and gone, but, like, Scottish Twitter and stuff like that, like people who, like, write in Scots online, and the deciphering the kind of dialect. It's just we're used to it because we've got a lot of Scots influence, obviously, in our part of the world, but there is an aggressive charm, I guess, to that way of speaking that I think that we're certainly culturally quite tuned into. So it just makes me smile every time I read it. Yeah, and I had actually sort of forgotten that this book was the first appearance of the Knock McFeagle, and
Where's
hopefully it's not too much of a
did
spoiler to
we
say that
have
they're going to
did
return.
we have Mac Beagle
Mac Knack
in
McFeagle.
the previous guards book,
I
Sergeant
don't
Roland?
don't believe so. I'm happy to be contradicted, but I'm
Maybe one of the wee. I think it was a gnome actually.
mm, yeah. So it's a subtle but important distinction.
Ah,
Yeah. So there's a gnome in the watch. That's right. But the gnome in the watch is not a Knack McFeagle. I was about to say something that might have been considered a spoiler, so I'll just
right in if you
pause
think
there.
PJ's right.
I could totally, yeah, I could totally be wrong. But this is, yeah, in terms of, like, the whole Knock McFeagle society and the Kelda, and, like, and and again, my understanding in the wider Discworld is that this is, like, they're native again to this part of the disc, like they're native to Uberwald, and then they sort of move to Lancre. That's all kind of set up in this book, and then they sort of play a bit of a expanded role, I suppose, later on, without giving too much away. So yeah, great to see them kind of more or less fully formed
There were a
in
few
this
other
first appearance.
points I wanted to pick up on before we. Sorry, I completely forgot what I was going to say there. Um, I
Uh,
want to pick up on new. Sorry, my head's a bit stuck here. Um, Completely forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, I wanted to pick up on our new addition to the witches, Agnes and Perdita.
mm,
It's like changing around the magic. I think Agnes has really got a kind of fits in differently. She's a bit more challenging towards Nanny Og and Granny, but has seems to have a bit more respect or tolerance for Granny than Magrat did. Magrat had, I think part of the problem with Magrat was that she was kind of always in opposition to Granny Weatherwax. It made for some great moments, but um, it maybe kind of set us against her. Whereas I think Agnes is willing to show Granny a bit more respect, or at least to her face. Um,
yeah, that's fair for sure. Yeah, because I guess Magrat as the kind of the maiden in the trilogy or whatever, the coven, like, she was always our kind of POV entry level audience perspective witch. So yeah, because she did have that slightly more antagonistic relationship with Granny, it maybe was presented her as a bit more of a villain in those early books. And yeah, Agnes in the early stage, like what we're talking about now in part one, where it is just like the three of them, 3.5, I guess, because you've got Perdita riding along. It feels like, oh yeah, this is like, it's a conscious effort to kind of shake up the dynamic, and you're kind of curious as a reader as to where that's going to go. But if I had a criticism, I suppose I would say it's that it doesn't really go because, first of all, Granny goes, like, so without Granny, there's no triumvirate, and then And then Magrat comes back, and there's this kind of hint that, oh, maybe that's going to be a triumvirate. But we all know, I mean, Granny Weatherwax is the main attraction. Like, we all know that we're not losing Granny Weatherwax. So bringing Magrat back and keeping Agnes involved, like, I don't know, the dynamic feels a little bit wobbly at times. Not so much in this section, but maybe a little bit later on.
And Perdita's a lot of fun. That duality, that two voices thing. Um,
Yeah, because it's that great literary device where you just like you just write that that thing that everybody wishes they could say but never would. That's what Perdita says. Like anytime you had to bite your tongue around your boss, or anytime somebody cuts you off in traffic or something. Perdita is that inner voice. And then and the interaction between the two of them is always really feels really genuine as well, and really funny.
um, I think we've met them both before, but this is the first time for me that they both really click within that almost triumvirate within that coven as it shifts. Uh,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I read this before I read Masquerade, which, as you can imagine, was slightly confusing at the time. But I was just like, okay, fine, I guess, you know.
the other thing I want to mention, it was about my layouts.
Mm.
I've got my holy book here.
Oh,
Um, And you've got the whole thing with like his relationship with the witches throughout is fantastic. Um, Nanny Ogg's addressing the witch trials directly comments on religious superstition, but also subverts that because Terry's agenda is a two-way street. Um, Commenting on our disdain for the religious, where it is about the old ideology and not the person. Thank you,
yeah,
week.
yeah. It's a good insight. And more pertinent than ever, I suppose, in today's world, in terms of just that whole, just confronting the kind of barefaced misogyny of organized religion, I suppose, and the kind of patriarchal society that props it up, and vice versa. And and the I don't know, as we record, we've just had the UK Supreme Court basically rule against trans people in the definition of sex and gender. And if you think about how people did end up persecuted in those days, it's, because they stepped out of societal norms, or they stepped out of gender norms, and then they ended up burned at a stake. I think it all feels quite pertinent, and a little bit actually a lot more serious. Just reading that stuff in this time and place, but also quite affirming that, like in beat one of this story, there's a priest and there are witches, and the witches are going to confront the fact that organized religion has been a disaster for women forever. I think it's really, it's pretty brave, writing in the mid to late 90s about that stuff. And obviously it's a message that's depressingly pertinent even today. Sorry, that required quite a big drink of whiskey after for obvious reasons. Um, but as you were alluding to, I suppose, Andy, the fact that omniism or omnianism or whatever it is, as a religion was responsible for all those things, like Oates as a character is a good person. Like, he is a genuinely good person in the context of this story, in the context of this world.
It's great to have that flow through continuity from Small Gods, which I think this is does its legacy well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of mind blowing. I'm pretty sure I read Small Gods before I read this, and I remember being blown away by, like, oh yeah, like everything, the stuff that we read about Brother is now, like, it's the scripture for this guy.
Yeah,
And the kind of subtle differences between, like, what we know happened and, like, what has made it into the scriptures, and what Oates quotes and what he believes about Brother versus what we've read.
Oates quotes.
Yeah, well, try saying that after a couple of big glasses of whiskey. Um, but yeah, just that what we all kind of take for granted now, I suppose, which is that, you know, religion is subjective and scripture is subjective. You know, if you're kind of just taking your first tentative steps away from organized religion like that, that can be quite an empowering thing to think about, I suppose, you know,
I move on to the second.
by all means.
Good stuff. Uh, part two, threes. Perdita can resist mind reading as the vampires shared their plans to take over Lancre. Granny Weatherwax is declared missing, presumed not needed. Lacrimosa and Vlad try wine, grape blood. Nanny Og will wring those magpies' necks. Mightily Odd fears sinks of depravity and sexual excess, yet joins Agnes on carts of coffins for the castle. And in the kitchens, Mrs. Scorby is in a good mood. So,
Ooh, sorry, swallowed
the
an ice cube.
Irish
Yeah,
Lancre.
good time to talk about the vampire characters, maybe. You know, just
Yeah.
mentioning
So
Lacrimosa
what I
and
really
Parfait here.
appreciated in the first part was how, like, we know they're vampires. There is, we know what it says on the back cover before we even read it, but they are written to be really quite likable and quite charming. And, we know that they're going to do horrible things somewhere through the pages, but you honestly don't feel it for some time. Um, I really
Yes, for
like those characters.
agreed. Yeah, I don't know if this is kind of a pop culture touchstone that's on your radar, but I couldn't help but picture the vampire family this time around as the family from Schitt's Creek. You ever watch that
Not,
sitcom?
I've
No.
released in the first episode or two.
Yeah, just that, like, cause you know the kind of cause they're posh or whatever, and it's the dysfunctional brother and sister in particular, like Lacrimosa. I really, really picture. Um, oh gosh, I forget her name now. But yeah, or Eugene Levy as the count, I think that's definitely got legs as well. So I had a lot of fun with that. That was my mental image this time around, and I think it added something to that family dynamic for me for sure. Uh,
I'm seeing them as various members of the family of blood from the two-part Paul Cornell Doctor Who.
oh, fair, specific. Yeah, I like it though. Yes, I do. I mean, yeah, because yeah, I think your default reaction is that they should be British. So yeah, this is probably the first time I've ever imagined a Discworld character as American. Um, but yeah, just the dynamic between them, I think, is fun and really like feels lived in. You know, the way the brother and sister kind of needle each other and stuff. Really, really good. Um, and all the over the top vampire names, the Lacrimosa, like what does that mean? But yeah, Vlad is a classic, I suppose. And the drinking the wine, I know it's just like the only line I actually remember from Dracula the movie is "I never drink wine." It's like it makes me laugh every time I hear it. Bela Lugosi's delivery in that is just spot on. Yeah, so just yeah, to see that reference, all the callbacks to it in this make me laugh every single time, even on this reread. Still made me laugh.
Because I spent more time with the sorry, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say there. Um, because I come from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer end of the vampire mythos rather than the Bram Stoker
Yeah, you see, you're already
through
postmodern. Like this kind of
Stoker
post,
end.
yeah, this postmodern vampire take is this is all right up your street already.
Yeah, I much prefer that. So I necessarily wasn't thinking about the mind reading aspect of it and
Mm,
the sort of the falling under the thrall of.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
those were very interesting to me and how Nanny Og and Verence and Margaret were all quite taken with them, whereas Perdita was able to put up resistance. and this also led into Vlad's attraction to Agnes. So yeah, that joined seamlessly.
Yeah, I find all that stuff quite stressful as a reader. Even the second time around, we sort of know everything's going to be okay, but just like, I don't know, maybe it's something about the current political climate or something where it's just like the kind of, I guess it reads as like willful ignorance maybe of the people where they're just kind of like, they're very, very willing to just be sheep, I guess. To like, not to be all kind of, 14 and this is deep or whatever, but like, how the ease with which vampires are able to take over a country, and like they're just straight up vampires, they're not lying about being vampires, they are vampires. And the ease with which they're kind of bloodlessly able to take over an entire country, and and the people just go along with it, I think is kind of obviously kind of has.
I hadn't really thought of it before, but there is a very sort of political or at least class element to it. I mean, I thought like Varys being inviting vampires in and then Varys being a king
Yeah, yeah.
has, that as big geopolitical seismic shifts. Well, for Lancre's pretty
Hmm.
big, but going back to Stoker, Dracula was a count. He lived in a castle. He presumably got that through vampiric means, and we have a vampire in the White House. And
Yeah, well, this is it, and this idea that like it's almost like people like the people are under a spell, like, and then obviously in this book the people are literally under a spell, but the fact that they're like it's less hassle to be ruled by vampires than it is to try to fight the vampires seems to kind of be the message. But it's certainly at least it's the count's message in this book, and you're like, yeah, man, shit, like that turned out to kind of be true. Like that's where we're at, or that's where they're at. Maybe in America, it's where they're at in Hungary, it's where they're at in El Salvador. So yeah, I find that kind of a lot more sinister. Obviously, it's sinister. It's vampires taking over a country. It's sinister, but I find it quite socially sinister as well on this read through. Depressing almost in a way that maybe it wasn't the first time around.
yeah, because a lot of mind is given to the social of it and the sociable, the
Hmm.
the fancy parties in his honor, the um, much later the visit to escrow,
Well, yeah, I mean that's what really nails it. But yeah, like you
culture
say,
as well as
yeah.
part of that.
But these first bits were like, yeah, like like Varens, like you said, is being mind controlled, and you can tell that he's trying to fight it, but he can't. Like that's as her, that leans into the horror aspect of this book as much as any of the straight up, vampire stuff does, or occult stuff does. I think there's always those little moments of body horror almost in the witches books, and like that idea of not being in control of your own body or of your own mind is those are the kind of bits that stick with me, I think, more than any kind of like werewolves or vampires or anything like that.
There's a fair wee bit of going back and forth to the castle in this, and I don't think I minded it at all. I
No, I
was
certainly didn't on a first read. But if I had a criticism, I guess it's that the vampires take over quite quickly, and I guess they sort of, by their nature, the powers that they're given, there's no other outcome. So yeah, once they do, it's like you say, oh, we go back, oh, then we forget everything, then we leave, then we go back again. Um,
Yeah, but I think it comes in a way. It's almost well, in my experience, it was kind of hard to see it happening. So usually there's several points in a Pratchett book where I just don't get stuff. There were 2 points in this, and I'll talk about the second one was when the Og boys are fighting people at the castle, and I couldn't quite get initially who they were fighting. I thought it might have been fellow Lancre men under the thrall, but it actually turned out to be vampires who had been drafted in from Uberwald, and so that kind of some we see some come in the coffins here, but we're not really told the full extent of the vampire army that drafted in. They seem to come in
Yeah.
quite subtly. I think the coffins and the carts is probably the biggest
Well,
moment that's pointed out.
at one point, the Count, I guess, introduces the mercenaries. Like he's got mercenaries, and it's like whether they're being paid or whether they're just under the spell of the vampires is kind of, or both, I guess, is kind of left a bit ambiguous. But yeah, he has grunts, I guess. He's got some red shirts that the Augs can kind of throw spears at or whatever. But yeah, I do feel like that some of that stuff was a bit shoehorned in just so you could have the kind of the mob at the gates and a bit of a battle and something happened basically at the castle. Because then the main action, because once, oh, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about it when we get there.
Uh,
Trying to,
but let's just agree that magpies are stupid. They don't know that the rhymes that we have for magpies are, so the rhymes don't make any sense and don't make any sense anyway.
yeah, magpies
What's
has
your
a
feeling
kind of
of magpies?
one of my feelings of magpies. Yeah, worse now after rereading this book. Anyway, that's for sure. It's an interesting choice actually as a vampire kind of motif, I suppose, because it's not, you're thinking bats usually, aren't you? So, or I mean, or if you were gonna, I would go crows or ravens or something like fully black. So yeah, magpies is an interesting choice, and I'm sure it's one that's very considered. But he obviously made that choice on purpose for a specific reason. And I wonder what it's about. Is it about the fact that they're thieves? That they're known for kind of stealing things, and the vampires are coming to steal the kingdom away, or I don't know. But it was interesting 'cause it feels like not super tropey, It feels like it's definitely purposeful and it's been given some thought. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But I'm definitely much more suspicious of magpies this week than I was last week. Oh, part three. Is it my turn to do part three? Okay, here we go. Part three. Bigjobs. Magrat flees the castle armed with rabbits and ragdolls. Hodgera gets burned. Three witches cross the gnarly country's river. Granny Weatherwax is given up. Nanny Og organizes a piss up and a riot. Mightily Oates, vampire hunter, is defeated. And Granny Weatherwax gone. Bitten, tossed. Oh yeah, this actually put me through the ringer this time. It's just so bleak in places.
There's
Like,
so this is always the way with the third part of Discworld. Just everything explodes, everything
yeah,
happens.
yeah,
Oh,
it's almost like he was good at this writing business, isn't it? Yeah, there's like Hodge. Haven't talked about Hodgera. Like I give that a
okay,
good
so
stab.
this was actually there's an awful lot of really bad stuff happens in this book, but this was actually the second big one. I thought Hot when the Phoenix went off in front of Hot Shargs that he was dead, and I
Yeah,
was utterly shocked. I was just blown away at this.
yeah, I like that. It's like, oh yeah, Granny Og might go, or Granny Weatherwax might go away forever. That's bad. But if the Falconer dies, uh, but he's been this like slightly recurring comedic relief character throughout the Witches book, and he actually gets stuff to do this time around, which is nice. He gets to participate. And the whole stuff with the Phoenix, yeah, I guess I mean it's not a myth, I guess, that I would have been super familiar with on either read through, frankly. So the idea that the fire doesn't burn people, I don't know if that the way he's got the feather, but the fire doesn't burn him, it goes on his finger and stuff. Like I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how well established that is, or like what the kind of what the interest maybe from Terry's point of view, and that is, but like it's good that because it plays such a significant role in the finale. It's good that it's like it's really well set up in this portion, you know.
It's a good choice. Mentioned earlier that dualism.
Yeah.
Like a phoenix is the opposite number from a vampire. I've not seen that in any X-Men comics or I've encountered phoenixes.
Yeah, Dracula is canonically a character in the Marvel universe as well. So
That.
make it happen, Marvel. Can we write? We need to write in, make that happen. Yeah, God, I mean, it's so obvious when you say it like that. I guess that, yeah, the Phoenix is the kind of natural counterpoint to a vampire in terms of mythical creatures. So I hadn't really considered it in that way before.
And yeah, my knowledge of phoenix is the same as you know. I don't know if there are more than one about the same time. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, there's a pub at the bottom of my road called the Phoenix. It's quite
Oh,
nice. Yeah, it's nice.
you heard it here first.
Yeah, come if you're ever in the area, the Antrim Road in Belfast, come stop in for a pint in the Phoenix.
Fantastic. That'll be a YouTube short then. Well, that'll promote this podcast.
I mean, any excuse, yeah, any excuse to go out for a pint, absolutely. Uh, yeah. So what else is going on? Big jobs, love that. Just knock big figures, speak all the time. Should try and do a whole podcast in Scots. Maybe we'll be able to get a bit of funding.
Oh no.
Yeah, we immediately exhausted our vocabulary there. Um,
The
so yeah,
I wanted to
go.
mention I mentioned that too problems of comprehension in
Oh
this.
yeah.
So you're gonna love this one. It was the witches are crossing the country river in search of Nanny Og,
Mm,
and there's the whole bit where they have to cross these stones with the river and the nothingness or the everythingness below them. They don't, depending on how each witch copes when they're blindfolded. And there's a bit where Agnes Perdita falls and has to be rescued by Nanny Og. And then it goes into this whole conversation, this whole back and forth, the witches just talking. And I like a page or so on, and I'm thinking, this happened when they're in the middle of these stones. Shouldn't really we should be told they've been crossed the stones to the other side and they're safe. And I looked back over it a couple of times, kept reading. It was like 2.5 pages on.
mm.
And then they crossed over to the other side. I looked back to see what happened. And it was Nanny Og went off on one of her spiels and hooked everybody in to get involved and to weigh an opinion. And it was just an absolute character moment. They hadn't actually crossed. They were standing in the middle having this great debate. And that was such a lovely sort of thing. When I thought I had picked a hole in the novel, it wasn't there at all.
Nah, he's always one step ahead, and I think, well, you know yourself when you're in these kind of timey-wimey situations, like the gnarly country where like time and distance, everything's messed up. Then you just write your own rules. You know, it's all character driven instead. Uh, yeah, I think he does a great job of that for sure. And just the whole idea of it, like that this is where Granny would go, I guess makes sense. I'm not always necessarily a big fan of these kind of, there's a valley that's lost in time or something. But yeah, certainly the way like Nanny approaches it and the way that Agnes and Perdita approach it as well is interesting, where that like their perception of it is different. That like where one witch sees this like, or where Agnes actually sees like a massive drop, Perdita sees just like the stream right there. And the jolley of that character and what that says about each side of her character is obviously important as in terms of what's going to happen later on. So yeah, I guess on the reread when I was talking about being impatient though, like these kind of sections were like, yes, obviously we're gonna get there. Yes, we're gonna meet Granny. Yes, Granny's gonna tell them all to go away. and there's not a lot of maybe. I feel like this section could potentially do with a twist like this, where they just kind of go find Granny. And well, now to be fair, on the first read, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion. Did you assume at this point that they would bring Granny back? That they would go find Granny and then Granny would be like, yeah, fine, okay, I'm going to come back and join in? Was that your kind of assumption of what was going to happen?
No, that's a difficult one to answer because I'm generally there was keeping myself open to what happens. Um,
Fair, fair, fair.
I was thinking that Granny had some sort of plan. I didn't buy that she had decided to give up. Um, I
Yeah,
think I've twigged that she was just biding her time, having a bit of a think, hatching a plan.
yeah.
But
So I guess my assumption was
the
when, yeah,
witches returned, they half went out and then they decided to go back in and talk to her properly.
yeah.
Then I have to move that lava lamp. Uh, and then
First world problems.
second time I kind of wobbled like that lava lamp. I said, well, is she actually no, she's not quitting, but there's something else at play here.
Yeah, I mean it's quite a big swing. It's a brave choice, and as I say, like everything just feels so kind of hopeless. It's like there's no way to defeat these vampires because they can basically control people's minds. The only person who has a chance of going toe to toe with him is Granny. Granny's not up for it, so like, okay, then I guess it's over. It's like it's such a low point in the story where she decides not to get involved at this point, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, I guess, where it's like this roughly at the midpoint where you're like, all right, they're gonna go get Granny. Granny's gonna come back and kick some ass. You're like, yeah, you're kind of getting psyched up for it, and then it doesn't happen, and it's like obviously the right choice. It's the specific choice that he made, and it actually tonally feels right when you consider the story as a whole. But like in the moment, you're like, oh man. And on the reread, like it takes a while for them to get there. And if you know ahead of time that it's not going to pay off, it's quite a lot of business, in terms of them getting through the gnarly space and all that kind of stuff. And as you say, going out of the cave and going back in, it's quite a lot of business for something that doesn't pay off until quite a bit later on when Granny comes back. So yeah, I find this bit a bit not hard to read as such because it still has some good gags and stuff, but like knowing ahead of time that like their big kind of rescuing Granny isn't going to pay off, it made it a bit kind of harder to read maybe this time around.
I didn't twig what her plan was. I think I was probably closer to understanding it having read The Sea and Little Fishes and knowing that this cave is essentially an isolation zone. Uh,
Yeah,
it's a kind of self-imposed cage in a way. And like so what I understand has happened is we're being fed this whole idea of headology that she's hiding somewhere and there's this guessing game, but in actual fact, Granny's tactic was to play the opposite thing to make her so much in herself and to use this cave as the starting point for that journey.
yeah, true. Yeah, the short story does add quite a lot of context to this, and I yeah, I wish I sort of had read it before my first read because yeah, I think that would have been useful for sure. So yeah, so when all that's kind of going on and like Granny does eventually come back off her own volition, Granny like it's set up well. Yeah, it is set up, but kind of in the first section where like Granny's always going to arrive at exactly the right time. And when that does inevitably happen, and then it just gets beaten down again, like she doesn't win and she gets bitten, and you're like, oh, it's just blow after blow. But at that point, yeah, when Granny gets bitten, you're like, okay, now something's going to happen. Like there's no Granny wouldn't have let this happen if she didn't have a plan.
Right.
And it's a great way to end this section. So all this, it's like I love how he's starting to really, really play with like these conventional story structures as well, where like, yes, you're expecting the witches to bring Granny back to save the day. No, she doesn't do that. Oh, but yes, she turns up at the nick of time. Oh, but then she gets defeated. You know, it's actually really it's really good. Even though I said that like maybe on the second time, the second read, it's not as surprising, but like it's still really well constructed. It's still subverting tropes and doing some really really interesting stuff.
And that scene has that classic stand up to the body, get beaten down thing. We have,
Yeah,
I think, Agnes first or Magra, certainly Mightily Oates comes in to save the day and
yeah.
is knocked back, and then Granny enters. And yeah, I at that point I couldn't see how she was getting out of it or what her plan was. And the way her body is treated afterwards is pretty ghastly. Again, you kind of feel it as a Granny Weatherwax fan, don't you?
Oh, big time. Yeah, I mean, like the whole book is putting Granny through the ringer, but this is the real inflection point for that. Like, where yeah, she gets beat down by a vampire, gets bitten by a vampire, and then tossed aside as you kind of put it in your synopsis. It's brutal. Yeah.
Um, Whereas normally when and Granny goes through the ringer quite a lot, um, as Granny specifically, but I
Mhm.
think this book definitely makes an exception to that in that it's Miley Oates that goes through a lot of it with her. Um, I think
Yeah.
down to the two of them really.
Yeah, and this is where that kind of relationship starts to kind of coalesce here, isn't it? Like after she's bitten and she wakes up in the blacksmith with him, and then they kind of go on their journey together. So maybe that's as good a time as any to synopsize part four.
Part four, readying to kick some butt. Ference is rescued and signs a contract with Big Aggie. Igor drives the witches to Uberwald, where they meet Scrapf. Oates suffers and endures the very long night of Granny Weatherwax. Agnes is taunted by Vlad before the vampires take her to the square in escrow for a massacre, or maybe a nice cup of tea.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about Igor really. And is this the first Igor, or have we had any Igors in More Pork? Oh yes, the barman in no, is the barman in the Uberwald pub an Igor? Don't know, but it takes a bit of getting used to, doesn't it? All the kind of writing with the THs instead of S's. Like if you think reading the Knack McFeagle stuff is bad, but even reading Igor can be challenging at times as well. Scraps is a great name
Yeah,
for to say with a lisp though, for sure.
yeah.
Uh,
Scrap is a great character.
yeah, indeed, indeed.
The I know we get that sort of stitched together creature when we're introduced to Igor, but I think with Scrap takes on a new life.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the best boy or multiple boys, as the case may be. But yeah, that I guess that the very long night of Granny Weatherwax that you so expertly
That's
describe
stolen
it.
from J. Michael Straczynski, yeah.
Of course, yeah. It's a good reference.
Um,
Um,
it is one. It's a story that uh, runs right through this part, and the final fifth of the book is just that long journey that the pair of them go on together. And my God, it's brilliant, isn't it?
it's really good. Yeah, I think part of my earlier criticism is that I'm probably impatient to get to this bit. Like as I kind of maybe alluded to at the start, like all Granny and Oates's kind of theological debate and all that stuff like that. That's probably my favorite part of this book. It's my favorite storyline in this book, probably. So I think, yeah, a lot of my criticism probably just comes down to me being impatient to get to this bit.
It can't help but remind you of Small Gods and Brother going through the desert, although probably in a want not to compare Granny to Vorbis. I imagined brother alone through the desert when I was remembering this bit. Um,
Yeah, I was thinking in that comparison, if Oates is brother, then Granny is on. Like Granny's God, you know.
but they are actually so evenly matched.
Yeah, I think what one of the great kind of through lines of all Discworld and all of Terry's writing really is that like he's always able to kind of bring these really big themes and big ideas like right back down just to the human level. So like I mean, yeah, we talk about this in Small Gods and everybody does, I suppose, but in terms of just like what that kind of evil with a capital E, what that is and how it relates to organized religion specifically, you know, that's all well and good to discuss that in abstract, but organized religions are made up of people, and Oates is one of those people, and he's a good person. So when you put that up, you know, when you bash that up against Granny's idea of organized religion as this like really negative thing, like that's when it gets super interesting. That's when you get into all those really naughty conversations and debates and like really rich thematic discussion in this book. And just it's worth revisiting, even though he's sort of done it in Small Gods, it's worth revisiting it through the eyes of Granny Weatherwax now that she is such a well realized character with such a specific worldview, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of give and take from both those characters who are both kind of set. Well, Granny's certainly set in her ways. Um, what surprised me about Mike Lee Oates, I guess when I thought I already knew him, but I didn't, was that he was so willing to let Granny think she had her way, um, or just to sort of agree to get her off his case, and little things like that, or like telling little white lies,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, just to keep things running smoothly.
Yeah, and that's that human touch, I guess, isn't it? You know, that you're like, yes, you might have an idea that like this a particular religion or whatever is like really good or really bad, but at the end of the day, the kind of people who practice it are gonna be people, and they're gonna maybe bend the rules or break the rules in a specific situation because it's gonna help somebody else, or in this case, I suppose as well, like. Do you think Granny's kind of tested him, like as well? Like Granny's kind of she's kind of goading into him making these concessions just to see how far he'll go, or is she's maybe just genuinely spent at this point?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. She's
Yeah.
genuinely spent, and there's a really, I'm trying to remember the exact quote. Um, the Oates says he says something like, "You're a natural disputant, aren't you?"
Oh, I have it. I have it in front of me,
And she
I
just
think.
has to be so disagreeable all the time with everything. It reminds me of myself.
Yeah, I have it. I saved it somewhere. Hold on. Sorry, we're gonna have a massive pause now. But when I was
Like
checking my
editing,
bookmarks
right?
earlier, I saved that. Uh, I've lost it again. Yeah, but he says, "Yeah, you're one of life's natural disputants." She says, "No, I ain't." Yeah, there's some good bits actually, you know. Oh well, we'll get to that actually. As well, no, I mean we're in this section now, yeah, with escrow and the vampires starting to realize that they want a cup of tea.
Yeah, so the massacre at Escrow, although it in terms of stakes, haha, it's nowhere. It is genuinely terrifying of what could have happened.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, I get what you're saying earlier about real life politics and war. That yeah, utterly frightening.
mm, yeah,
And
I,
the build up to it is just so casual.
yeah.
It's just youngsters out for a bit of joy, and that's our lead into it.
Yeah, that again, yeah, I mean, yeah, reading all the stuff as an adult now and instead of as a kid, like all that stuff is framed in a different light for me, I suppose. Where you're like, yeah, the kids are just like indoctrinated into this, like they don't know any different, and then you think about the Khmer Rouge maybe, or you think about Nazi Germany even, like in like get if you can capture a whole generation to believe something, then you're set up. That's you. You're good. You know. So the vampires have got the kids convinced that this is just like a cool thing. They have a coming of age ceremony, and it's like it becomes part of their society. That's when shit gets real. You know, terrifying, like embedded into people's actual lives, their day to day lives, their culture, I guess. So yeah, so I find it particularly chilling on this read, especially in the context of everything that's going on in the world. Uh, but yeah, like just like when he carefully, obviously has carefully chosen like when to involve children as a storytelling device. In this story, I think like he really picks his moments for like maximum emotional impact. You know? Yeah, this whole sequence with escrow is like, yeah, it's a tough read, and even right to the end, you know, even when they win, and you're like, yes, great, they've shook off. We're getting ahead of ourselves slightly, but they've shook off the yoke of the vampires. But they're like, oh yeah, make sure the children know, like make sure they see,
Right.
so that they won't forget. And you're like, oh yeah, I mean, even when they win, like this is gonna take a toll on these kids, and like you know, coming from our part of the world, and maybe seeing some of the things that we've seen as kids, we're like, yeah, I mean that those things stay with you for good or for ill, you know, and it's so well observed. Like they just throw stuff like this into like a silly fantasy story about vampires is it's insanely good writing.
Yeah.
Insanely good.
My feeling is that um, completely forgot what I was going to say there. Um, my
Sorry, I talk a bit too long every time and then you forget. It's
my
my vampire mind control. That's what it is.
my feeling is that this type of tyrant has to really be stood up to firmly. But it's one thing me saying that, but saying that to you as a parent, and then saying that to myself as like a 10-year-old who maybe who saw those atrocities on the news and had to sort of grow up feeling that fear around him.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if uh, by saying something like Donald Trump should be removed at gunpoint, and adding graphic detail to that, you know. Um, well, okay, yes, that would be helpful. But other names on that list, particularly the further down you go, I'm not sure. And the more graphic you become, I'm not sure how helpful that is.
Yeah, but what it costs the people who actually take that action, I think is interesting, and it's kind of alluded to a little bit here, and it's something that comes up again, maybe, you know, thematically later on in the series too. But yeah, I think like there's such canny observations of society and such canny observations of human nature that he almost just seems to throw out in passing, you know? Like this is it's really, really deep stuff. It's like it bears repeated examination, you know, based on what's going on in the world at any given moment. Like I mean these books, you know, they deserve their place in the British literature canon, like for sure.
Absolutely.
Part five. While Grebo sleeps. In Lancre, there's unexpected backup for Varence and the Og boys. Meanwhile, the people of Escrow raise the stakes, and all forces converge on Uberwald Castle for a showdown. Furious with the death of Scrap, Igor returns the old math death. The Count learns he shouldn't have invited Granny Weatherwax in, and Mightily Oates finds his faith rewarded. Lightning strikes, for which Death loses his sight. Oh, I haven't said it yet, so I'll say it now. Lots going on. Lots going on at this bit.
That's going
Um,
on. Yeah, yeah.
indeed, indeed. Um, yeah, so we talked about escrow a bit already, I guess. But yeah, the the Knack McFeagles, basically piloting Varence like a puppet into battle is good fun. Um, yeah, I mean, poor old Varence, I guess, is quite used to taking a backseat in these stories at this point, I suppose. So you're not really asking for any more than this, and it's got some great comedy beats in it. So, you know,
It said Granny Weatherwax loves a showdown, and so I had to use that word when writing the synopsis. There's
yeah.
a bit early on, maybe in the about a page 100 out of 425, when Granny says, I think she says maybe to Agnes that there have to be three. I think it's actually when Granny's bitten. She
Mm.
says have to be three, and you have to gather the three. And it occurred to me later, or as I was compiling the synopsis and reading back on other pages, that that kind of starts a countdown, doesn't it? Um, and there's a whole stakes being raised where the witches are all actually being sent in different directions. So then when we do get them finally converging on the castle at Uberwald, not Lancre, um, that everybody's kind of in a weakened state. Magra is like really threatened. Agnes is just she's pretty knackered as well. Mighty Oaks. Um, Granny is covered in mud and shit and has had the stuffing knocked out of her, is half dead. Um, she's still a rake at the gates of hell.
Yeah, I wonder, I'd be interested to know about the kind of the writing process for this kind of final act because it sort of feels that there was maybe a point where it was shaping up for a final showdown at Lancre Castle, and then in a way you kind of go, oh, actually that doesn't really make sense. Because like if you want to do the vampire tropes, you need to go into the vampire's castle to kill the vampire. Like that's the trope. So maybe like you were saying earlier, that kind of slightly odd showdown between the Augs and the mercenaries and stuff like that. That's kind of anticlimactic in the literal sense because it's not the climax. And I wonder, was that a sort of later addition maybe, or was there a pivot at some point during the writing where you go, oh yeah, hold on, we got to go to Dracula's castle to kill Dracula and actually, and then subvert that trope brilliantly by actually going to Dracula's castle and bringing the old Dracula back to life, putting him back in charge.
I think you could be right about that because I think what Granny says about convening the three, that is at Lancre, and Lancre is where all the stakes have been
Yeah,
built
just
on
keep
stuff.
drink every time he says sticks. It's killing me. Oh God.
Um, but yeah, yeah, you go into the heart of it. Um, it's so these witches to actually deal with the invasion of their castle by going into the vampires' castle and screwing with them in their base of power. That's Granny Weatherwax's whole MO.
Oh, totally. And to be clear, like I think it's totally the right choice. And
Yeah,
maybe the Lanker thing, maybe that's actually an intentional red herring, and then the escalation to so maybe it is all perfectly planned and executed.
could
Uh,
could be. And there's a couple. I mean, Igor flipping is kind of something that we see is open to happen from fairly early on.
for sure, yeah, yeah,
And when it does, it's very natural. It's very organic. He doesn't even there's no sort of flag posting of right. I'm with yous now or come and join us. It just happens. It's like screw them. And then
yeah.
the other element has me thinking is um, sorry, the other element is Um, Sorry, completely forgotten. The other element is about the old Mastiff coming back,
Yeah.
like speaking to the heart of vampiric power, and right in the center of what should be cut off and taken out, as well as that thing about age and generations. Doing things the old ways rather than the Count and Vlad and their newfangled practices.
Yeah, I mean, for all the kind of quite obvious piss taking out of, the vampiric tropes and the garlic and the never drinking wine and all that stuff, like he circles back to the idea that like that's what's best, you know? Like like the old vampire, the old count was in it, for the sport. And people knew where they stood with him, and it was kind of like, yes, he's a monster, but we know he's a monster, and we treat him like a monster, and he's not trying to be anything else. It's when monsters try to normalize themselves, that's where the problem arises. And where again, not just because I'm feeling angry at the world maybe this week, but like to keep bringing it back to contemporary politics, it's like it's when you normalize the monsters, that's when you're in trouble, or when you allow the monsters to normalize themselves, that's when we as a society are in deep deep shit. That's what happens. That's what Vlad and the Count and the family, that's what they're trying to do. That's what's going to happen in the world right now. But the old master, he's a straight up monster, and he'll go and he'll drink a virgin's blood every now and again, but at least like everybody knows where they stand with him. Right? So yeah, it's an interesting point, and like I think he does, despite all his kind of piss taking, he does have a bit of a soft spot maybe for like the kind of the classics, the Bram Stoker and the Nosferatu and the Bela Lugosi and all that stuff.
I think something very interesting happens when a good and competent writer writes against um, the things that they, when they work with constraints.
Yes, no, I agree. I see where you're going with it. Yeah, like yeah, Terry Pratchett writing vampires is like, it's like Grant Morrison writing the Justice League or whatever. Like something super interesting is going to come out of that.
And absolutely, I'm saying to you before I came on, I had a really rough month, and I think I mean this more sincerely than I have with any other book. Just this has really been a light at my side. It's been the mighty oats to my Granny Weatherwax. It's just been such a joy to be reading this and dipping into it when I can. Again, it was a book that I didn't really want to finish. I let those last 4 or 5 pages just stretch out.
Yeah, I definitely remember having that reaction to it the first time around, just like loving it and not wanting it to be over. I don't know, I felt the weight of it a bit more this time around, I think. But that's not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, like it's top 10 Discworld for me, well, I'd have to crunch the numbers, but I would say definitely top 12, if not top 10 Discworld for me, for sure.
Um,
Probably, yeah, might be my favorite witches book until, well, okay, I'll caveat this for the purposes of this, uh, for our reading order, it's probably my favorite witches book so far.
okay.
No, I will say unequivocally, it is my favorite witches book so far.
I've only finished it maybe yesterday or the day
Hmm.
before, so I'm still processing bits of it. And I really like the final sequence in the climax with Granny and the Count, but I'm still kind of processing her decision to sort of send him away for 50 years, as it were, rather than finish him off once and for all with a ghastly kind of sentence.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I
and
guess this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, maybe about, who pulls the trigger? What does it do to those people who have to witness that violence? And that itself is a very Granny Weatherwax thing that we've seen much earlier in the book.
Yep. No, I think you've nailed it there. I think, given the chance to change, I guess, to kind of see the error of his ways, to come back 50 years later and then just kind of get back on board with doing things the way that they were done and being a monster and just owning the fact that he's a monster and not trying to be anything else in the same way that the old master does. Like that's her ambition, like that's what she wants to see happen, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe that seems a little naive in the current climate, but like that's still a fantasy story at the end of the day. Like that's the superhero ending. Like Superman wouldn't kill that guy. Batman wouldn't kill that guy. Spider-Man wouldn't kill that guy. Granny Weatherwax won't kill that guy. That's the nature of the genre, and I think it's the right ending for that reason.
I had quite a lot of notes from my first part, but one of them was um, that I'd said before that Granny Weatherwax, I was kind of I'd mentioned that I was feeling a bit kind of feeling like my personality was kind of the closest. I kind of wished I was a nanny og, but I felt more like a Granny Weatherwax and I was a bit embarrassed about it. And
Interesting
I've
insight.
written, I suspect I am, but this makes me feel pride in being so.
Good. You should. Uh,
Um, and yeah, what a character.
on that note, I'm definitely a nanny og, he says as he opens his gigantic bottle of whiskey.
Oh, Gaita.
Yeah, man, all the way. Do you know what I need to get? I need to get my hands on that Nanny Og cookbook. We need to do a little Nanny Og cookbook special at some stage. I haven't read
Let's
it.
let's try that out.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, shall we go into the couple? There's a couple of wee epilogues to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of ending.
Um,
Where do we
the
start?
Mighty Oats one, I think, is the biggie,
Yeah.
because you get that beautiful sort of recognition from the people of Lancre and from Nanny Og specifically, um, and a smaller one from Agnes that of the part that this guy's played. Um, yeah, it really really worked for me. I've grown quite attached to that character in this book.
Mm. Yeah, I think considering the journey that he goes on with Granny in the second half, he earns that for sure. But it's also that like all the setup about how like in Lancre, like they have all these crazy priests who do baptisms and stuff, but then they're like everybody's suspicious of the Omnians at the start, but then they all come out to see him at the end. It's just it's just a nice way to round off his character arc in terms of what his relationship with the kingdom or with the people of Lancre is. It kind of gives him a big win because that's all he ever really wanted, right? Was like to be able to spread the word or to be able to like be noticed, I guess, by the people, and that finally happens for him in this little epilogue.
Yeah, because like underscoring all the effort and everything he went through physically, he thought of her in a way that nobody else in her base did or was prepared to.
Yeah, because he's an outsider, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's sweet, and all the kind of stuff that goes unsaid, I guess, between well, for a long time between Granny and Oates, and then between Nanny and Oates as well. There's no big saccharine kind of makeup or goodbyes. It's all very kind of you have to read between the lines, or the characters have to read between each other's lines to kind of to get that ending. Where Nanny is no longer kind of hostile, I guess. towards him and towards his religion or whatever, but it's never said, it's never spoken. And then he learns that, he realizes that that's how these people operate, and he's finally able to kind of accept that. It's nice, yeah. Yeah, and then Agnes, you sort of get the sense that she's kind of solidifying her place, I guess, as a character in this series, or is that your kind of takeaway?
Sorry, what was the question?
Like in terms of where we leave Agnes in this story, do you feel are you kind of ready for more, or do you feel like we're kind of wrapping stuff up, or kind of what's your?
Oh, I'm totally ready for more Agnes Perdita stuff. We've got a hint that she's changed. And it's not. I'm not sure if it's particularly gone into as if it's a supernatural thing or an experiential thing. But I really dig the characters. Um, I suppose was it Masquerade? We had her before.
Yeah,
She feels much more part of the society now,
yeah,
back home. And
yeah,
I mean, her and Perdita really come as a pair, don't they? And
yeah, and
um,
she's not resisting that anymore. I think that's the big takeaway from this, isn't it? That she's not trying to just be herself. She's kind of willing to be Agnes and Perdita together.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that conversation is happening.
Indeed. Yeah. Again, one of those experiences. It's always such a good experience doing the chat about this, which is why I'm rereading them, I suppose. But it's not that I wouldn't sit down and reread a Discworld book anyway. But like as I was reading this, I was it was tougher going than I was expecting it to be, because I did always remember this as one of my favorites, and then I was like, oh, it's a bit darker, it's a bit bleaker than I recalled. But then talking it through just like brings all the fun bits out, and like it's that appreciation of the story craft and of the skill that's on display as well. Does just kind of bring me full circle back to just really fully appreciating this book for what it is, which is, it's a masterpiece, as you said, right out the gate.
That's a nice segue into me saying how I'd love a dog to die.
It's great, but I mean, you're right. I mean, that's the right time to bring it up, because it's good storycraft.
Yeah.
If you want to get the audience on that character's side, somebody's got to kill their dog. Igor is the original John Wick. You know what I mean?
Uh, Scrap Scrap returning to Igor is perfectly built into the story logic.
Oh yeah,
But that little snapshot we get of Scrap and death, and particularly that he wouldn't let go of his scythe, is just wonderful. And I hope that Scrap and Death are reunited, or there's going to be another Scrap like character hanging out with Death, because that little page was just a wonderful glimpse. Of
yeah,
what
no,
it-
for sure, for sure. I mean, you can tell that.
on top of everything else, just cherry on the best cake.
Yes, no, for sure, and you can tell that Terry Pratchett is a good person, because he has a huge, huge problem with leaving animals dead. Do you know what I mean? Like Scraps comes back, Gaspode comes back. Like the dog isn't gonna die. Like it just leaves a bad taste in the audience's mouth if a good dog stays dead. Like, it hasn't happened yet in Discworld, and no spoilers, but I wouldn't get your hopes up.
So I refuse to choose a favorite quote tonight,
You
just because
refuse to.
I'm so badly organized.
Fair. I
Um,
I saved a few bookmarks actually.
got a few.
Yeah, okay. So I guess keeping in the whole sort of general theme of me kind of leading into the darker elements of this book, um, and also coming back to like probably the main thing that first attracted me to it, which was all the kind of theological debates, the discussion between Oates and Granny about mercy. Remember thinking that was super interesting at the time, and this idea kind of like stayed with me the first time I read it. So yeah, so Oates and Granny are talking about mercy, the concept of mercy, and Granny says mercy's a fine thing, but judging comes first. Otherwise, you don't know what you're being merciful about. So that idea that like religion is merciful and like oh yeah, if you're a Christian, you're merciful and that means that you're nice. But to decide to be merciful first means that you've judged somebody, and who are you to judge them in the first place? I remember thinking that like oh yeah, that's good. That's something to bring up in a theological debate when you're 14 years old, you know. So yeah, that's just an example, but all that stuff, all those discussions between Oates and Granny, I could read those all day.
Yeah, this is another little resonance from, or another big resonance from Small Gods, in that the dialogue that those two share on that journey feels so much like the conversations we got between Brother and and Brother and Vorbis.
Oh yeah, yeah, but like just take that to my veins. Like just give me that all day long. I love it. Can't get enough of it.
Um, I mean, I'm just going to pick one out
Do
of
it.
thin air here.
Go for it.
Um, I can't start repenting at my time of life. I'd never get any work done anyway, she added. I ain't sorry for most of it.
The shit, yeah. I'll raise a glass to that. That's how I feel right now, man.
There's so can I just claim all of that Granny Weatherwax, Miley Oates is a favorite scene?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Like as I say, I was so impatient to get there the whole time I was reading the first half. Yeah, it's great. It's a great sequence.
there's just so much good stuff, and that's why I chose not to pick out a particular quote, or because I just, yeah. So we'll see if I ever get to reread it. We'll see how I feel at that.
Try it maybe like hold off until we've defeated fascism again. That would be my advice.
Okay.
If there's
Right.
like I first read it in the 90s, which was like totally a different vibe. Cool. So yeah, on that note, geez,
Oh,
can
here's what. Don't do
okay.
anything I wouldn't do if you ever find anything I wouldn't do.
Yeah, it's a good one. And that I mean like it's hard to find a new punchline on that setup, but like if anybody's gonna do it, Terry Pratchett's gonna do it. Respect. Ah, yeah. What a good book.
So I believe next time we are going on to the fifth element, the fifth elephant. It's harder to say than I thought.
Yeah, it's it. Get some Igor vibes going on there. Yes, indeed. Not one that I've read more than once, so it'll be another kind of relatively fresh revisit for me. I have to, yeah, I have to download that onto the old iPad and crack on.
It's reminding me of the phrase "a fifth column," so I kind of hope it's related to the press in some way.
I
Hobby
can't
horse.
obviously say anything at this juncture to avoid
Oh, but then
spoilers.
Discord and Elephant have a link. It's quite big.
Indeed, indeed. No,
Is it the Discworld based orgy?
the less said, the better at this point,
Get my vote.
for many reasons. Why don't you get on with plugging stuff?
Yeah,
Before-
well, thanks to our friends at Prat Chat Podcast for the Blue Sky shares. My top patrons, Arslan Hyderali, Art K, and particularly Ian Lawther, who goes traditionally goes halvers on the Zoom bill, allows me and PJ to do this, but lately has been paying the whole thing. I owe him some money. So
Respect.
thank you very much to the great Ian Lawther. Um, our You can find us at I've never read Discworld at Gmail, Discworld GNU on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and we should plug some of the stuff that we've been doing.
I suppose. Yeah, you go first.
Are we allowed to talk about that link that you sent me regarding last month's project?
I did. I've forgotten, so just tell me, and then we'll cut it if
Um,
not.
Help.
Oh, help! Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's been out there for ages. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so Help is a wonderful VR film that PJ worked on with Owen,
Owen Cleland and Ryan O'Connor.
Um, I got to watch it as part of a demonstration at the Mac Belfast. Was kind of blown away by it.
Oh, thanks, man.
And managed to get a link off PJ to share with um,
Yeah, so it's on YouTube 360. If you've got a head-mounted device, search up "help short film." You can put my name, put Owen's name in. You'll hopefully find it. You can watch it on your phone in 360, but it plays much better in a head-mounted display. So if you're into that sort of thing, you're interested in a little short thriller, live action short thriller in VR, absolutely check it out. I kind of forgot that we made it, but the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, who funded it, sort of twisted our arm into exhibiting it in the Mac Art Centre in Belfast about a month, 2 months ago. By the time this goes out, probably. So yeah, if you're into that kind of stuff, check it out. It'd be lovely to hear your thoughts.
yeah, really quite fantastic. You can also see the work of PJ and Owen Cleland on Country Roads.
Yeah, Country Road still playing on BBC iPlayer. We're currently pushing uh, a longer form project, kind of with the same talent involved. So the more eyeballs on that, the better for us at the moment. Would be great if you're into short comedy with country music, people with complex needs, working class people from Belfast, fireworks. It's got everything. Well, it's got those four specific things, but it's quite funny. It's only 6 minutes long. Check it out.
And John Meagher's The Devil's Own,
Yeah,
which is
that's also
on
still kicking. Yeah,
BBC
BBC Four,
Sounds.
Radio Four, BBC Sounds documentary.
You can find it on a number of podcast platforms as well.
Indeed.
The Devil's Own, a fantastic documentary. Really entertaining, really spooky. If you liked this episode of I've Never Read Discworld, you'll love The Devil's Own.
Yeah, true. It's got that. It's got a similar blend of bleak societal themes and schlocky horror. But it's a good call. It's a really good call, actually. I feel that Andy's plugging all my stuff, so I gotta plug some of his stuff.
Do you want some visual cues?
Hold on, I might have some visual cues here actually. Just starting in alphabetical order, we've got Another Time,
Hey,
which is a novel by Holly Miles, edited by Andy Luke and sorry Andy, I forgot the name of your
Claire
co-editor.
Dixon and Sandy Walsh.
There you go. So
Please, yep.
yeah, thematically also similar, kind of about women's rights issues in the north of Ireland. What else you got going on?
Uh,
Coastlines After Dark.
Lines After Dark for every fan of Baywatch Nights and every fan who thinks they're not a fan of Baywatch Nights. The full Garth Marenghi experience. And in tales that are like take you about 6 minutes to read, but yet are quite filling, like a good baked potato.
Yeah, I actually don't have it here 'cause it sits on my desk at work, and I flick through it sometimes when I just need a break from like reading dry academic
Good
crap.
stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. That's what I like to hear. Um, I've just finished doing the first. I do 2 seasons a year of the press gang readers' commentaries, where I go through Stephen Moffat's groundbreaking 1990s series for like a deep dive. So I've done that. I've moved on to come. The next 8 weeks is Doctor Who Dumpster Flower, which is a new series of. It's kind of like a sketch show built around that week's episode of Doctor Who, like a comedy review with skits and stuff. And I just noticed that a lot of Doctor Who stuff on YouTube is really dumpster fire. So I wanted to put a bit more optimism on it. And even if I don't enjoy an episode, I try and have fun with it and make you go away feeling a bit brighter and such.
It's the right way. You gotta change the tone of the discourse. Also, that's a good band name, Doctor Who
Doctor Who
Dumpster Fire.
Dumpster Flower. Yes. Um, Tomorrow I've got um, a new short film premiering. It's to do with caption comics. It's captioned the UK's weirdest comics festival, and it's a longest running British comics festival and the smallest, most intimate, and one I've got a lot of love for. That I've actually stepped on board the committee
Oh, brilliant.
as it restarts after a 7 year hiatus. So
Some
that'll
stuff has been
be
happening.
Caption Rebirth, and our avatar is a phoenix. So I hope to be able to report back many phoenix related facts for you. But if you check out that film, it's done in that kind of style where I find myself once again channeling Charlie Brooker circa 2005.
Peak
So
Charlie Burger.
peak Charlie Brooker. Yeah. So check that out. And Always
What's it
Sunny.
called? What's it called? What's it called?
It's called Caption, the weirdest UK comics fest.
Awesome.
And Always Sunny in 200 seconds every Sunday. All on youtube.com/ at Andrew Luke. I've been really busy. Oh, and patreon.com/ Andy Luke. If you want to give me some money, which I could really, really use.
Yeah, hit it up. You get to see all that stuff ahead of time. Is that right? All
Yes,
your, all,
advance access to 9 videos a month, including this one. So,
nice
yep.
one. All right,
Patrons
cool.
generally see it about half a week or a week before anyone else.
Yeah, there you go. That's plenty of stuff to be getting on with. Every time we do this, and Andy's output makes me feel extremely unproductive. Feel like I need to get out there, make some stuff, make some new stuff. Been plugging the same things for about a year.
He's just doing a
So,
PhD. Don't worry.
oh yeah, I can't wait to plug that. I'm sure everybody's going to be dying to read that when it comes out 3 years time.
Be
Um,
surprised.
in the meantime, let's just all read some Discworld together and enjoy that. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. All right. Do you want to cap it off?
I'm Andy Luke, and today I read Discworld.
I'm PJ Hart, and I never drink wine.